But limited partnerships is where all of the case law comes from that caused LLCs to exist. So that's why we spent so much time telling how limited partnerships work, so you'll appreciate what went into limited liability companies. Most of you will use LLCs, but you got to understand the background. Okay. Isn't it interesting that this particular tool was developed in a state with no population? You know, but you know what? There's not much population there, but there is a vast amount of wealth. In fact, most of the top asset protection states are very low population states. You have Wyoming, you have Nevada, you have Alaska. So they're kind of sensitive about wealth protection. And so there's some very bright people put together this tool in the state of 1977. And the idea was pretty interesting. What they wanted to do was to have a tool that had all the best benefits of a thing called a limited partnership and all the best benefits of a thing called corporations. Now, you've all had the education so far, so what's the best thing that we might say about limited partnerships? Well, what causes asset protection? What's the one thing that a lawyer does not want to look down the barrel of when they're going to come after you? A charging order. So does it make sense? They said, oh yeah, we got to have one of those. So they made this legal document to have LLCs have charging orders in them. Well, what's the greatest benefit of a corporation? It's the greatest tax shelter in America. But they also wanted to make sure they eliminated the greatest disadvantages. What was the big disadvantage of a limited partnership? Well, there was unlimited liability against the general partner in the event of an inside lawsuit. Remember that? Oh, we'll fix that. So they took away the liability coming against the managing member, which is called a managing member. Okay, that was good. Well, what could possibly be the disadvantage of a corporation? Now, I want you to memorize the benefits of the corporation. It runs the business and gets the tax benefits. You should have that memorized so much it will fall off the end of your tongue anytime somebody asks you. Run the business, get the tax benefits. Run the business, get the tax benefits. Okay, great. It's an A+ rated tool for running the business, getting the tax benefits. But as we've explained to you, it's a lousy, lousy lawsuit protection device in protecting assets. Because if you hold assets in a corporation and the mother of all lawsuits comes against your corporation, can the lawsuit require the judge to liquidate your assets out of the corporation? It can happen, and it does. So here's what happened. For the last 150 years since corporations have been around, it's been customary for corporations to own assets, and nobody thought anything about it until we entered a lawsuit epidemic. And when we entered the lawsuit epidemic, we all of a sudden found that the judge can liquidate all the assets in the event that insurance is not enough. And so we started going around and recognizing that there was a flaw in a corporation, and that's protecting assets against lawsuits. So we started telling people, don't hold assets in your corporation. Where do you hold them? Well, limited partnerships, of course. Well, you see, what happens is if the corporate assets are now held in limited partnerships, can the limited partnership lease those assets now back to the corporation to use for its everyday business? Yes, but the benefit of that was it's now being protecting those assets through a charging order in a limited partnership we already know is awesome. But because there's no assets in the corporation, when the corporation gets sued, it takes 2 seconds for the trial attorneys to realize there ain't nothing there. So they settle for the insurance and move on to somebody else. Is that an asset protection strategy? Yes. When they put together LLCs, they decided that they wanted to be able to solve that problem, and so they did. They made one legal tool that had all the benefits of a corporation and one benefit of a charging order. What do you think? Wow. Greatest thing since sliced bread. Boy, were we excited. Ching. Yes. Well, that worked until they all went to court. What happened in those early cases when they went to court was very revealing. There were two things we discovered. Number one is really good news, and the other one is not such good news. So let's talk about the good news. The good news is that they found that if you use an LLC and tell your accountant to tax it as a corporation, for the most part, it's a perfect fit. With very few exceptions, when you set up an LLC and tell your accountant to tax it as a C corporation, it's the same as a C as far as the IRS is concerned. If you set up an LLC and tell your accountant to tax it as an S, it's the same as an S. And we already said this several times today. That turned out to be a very good success story. So, can you pretty much use LLCs in theory as a substitute for a corporation? And the answer is yes. Now, there are some very few exceptions to that, but generally speaking, that's the case.